yesterday, we talked about vMix and using it in a lot of different ways and ways to take advantage of it, ways to control it, so on and so forth. And today we're talking about audio in vMix, and Chris Sabato is here to talk through how he approaches it. He is a wizard at vMix and can kind of outline for us. So, Chris, welcome back to the show. Second day in a row. Good to have you.
And as a person who's a PC guy and not a Black Magic guy, like, I'm excited to get like some of that out there.
Very good, very good. So tell us, how do you think about audio inside of vMix?
So, like, to start with, I kind of wish Jonas was here a little bit today too, because when I'm limited in what I do because, and as we talked about yesterday, it's like I have, a soccer game. It's like, okay, well, I have 20 of those. And then I have a lacrosse game and I have 10 of those. And they're exactly the same as the 20 soccer games. So I don't have a ton of reasons to really stretch what I'm doing. And so I'm pretty focused. And like, once I find a path, like that's how it works. And so I don't have a ton of experience doing like a different stuff, different routing, different thing, different configurations every week. That's just not what I do. But for me, it's really about finding ways that I can minimize my workflow and also having ways that I can remotely control things. Because
do you primarily use vMix's tools to do the audio mixing, or do you do something that's outside of vMix?
It depends. It depends. I have an X32 that I use to do for everything that's in our gym. That is the primary audio mixer and then that mix comes into vMix, and then it does all our.
So essentially, all
too.
The channels are really not being managed by vMix. vMix is getting a stereo feed, and you're doing all the work really for the audio. In this case, it's kind of
mixed, because that's the X32 is taking in all the microphones.
And how many? Oftentimes would you have?
For basketball, play-by-play, color. There's a center court ambient, and there's ambient under each hoop, and there's an ISO of the in-arena announcer, and there's an ISO of the in-arena music.
I think a lot of people don't realize how many channels, especially for basketball.
Oh.
I was at a professional game that was in Sacramento, and I said, "Can you send me all the mics?" And he's like, "Do you want all the mics?" Like, and I was like, "Or do you want stems?" And I was like, "No, I want all the mics." And it was 27 channels, and that was sent to me of all the. And that wasn't the announcers. That was just the floor mics and all the other things they're picking up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, we had Imri on here a couple months ago, and like one of the things that he had started doing this year is he's got a. And what I do is there's a mic on the hoop to kind of get that whoosh when the ball goes through. But he's also adding a shotgun mic to get more directed sound underneath. So his hoops are double mic'd, and then there's
Do you have any when you're doing all this miking? Do you ever have a problem where you have to kind of protect the players because a lot of times there's some trash talk or other things going on, and you don't want to necessarily send that into the broadcast?
I mean, I haven't run into it. I'm using, like, for me, most of the stuff I'm using condenser Omni mics. And so they're just kind of picking up everything. And so, like, if someone is standing directly next to the mic talking into it, you will clearly hear them. If they're not, then it's just kind of a low rum. And
yeah. No, absolutely.
You think college players are more polite than the pros?
It depends.
Maybe not.
Just wondering.
Yeah, do you have anything you wanted to show before we jump into the questions?
I wanted to show basically just kind of a rundown of like what the vMix audio structure is. And so for vMix, there's basically, you've got inputs, you've got buses, and you've got outputs. And how those all work, it's not kind of a straight line. And, so you can see your inputs are your audio interfaces, a video that has sound, an NDI input, a video input, so like a camera that has audio with it. And, you have SRT ingest. There's anything that comes into vMix that has audio is an input. And then for outputs, you've got your audio interfaces. You can send audio out to an interface. You can send audio to a stream, to a record, to an external device, SRT, NDI, etc. And then in between that, you have buses. And you've got your main master bus, which that's your primary bus. That for the most part, that's where you're mixing everything. And then you've got your A through G buses, which can be routed to the master or to a separate device.
And why would you use, just for our audience, why would you use separate buses?
So, for example, one of the things that we talked about yesterday with Jonas is that, so for my soccer broadcast, I have an audio interface that brings in 4 discrete audio inputs into vMix, and so there's an input for each one. So this is different than what we were doing with basketball and the X32. And I want to be able to mute them or fade them all down at the same time. And so, like, when I go to commercial, I want to pot those all down. And I don't want to have to pot this one down, that one down, that one down, and so on and so forth. I want to do them all at once. And so what I can do is, instead of sending those to the master, I send those to bus A. And then I take bus A, bring it back in as its own input, and then I can set a trigger on various inputs that will pot down bus A. And so that will then pot down all those other inputs. And so it's a way, that's one way that you can kind of group audio and control. And
that's the way you would do it in, like, no, you do that in vMix as opposed to in the X32, because the X32 you could use either a bus or a DCA. Would that be another approach to that?
Yeah. So so in here, so we can see in this, I've got, so there's my ambient mic, there's my play-by-play, my PA, my field music, and then another play-by-play that comes in via Dante. And then all those, as you can see right here, this M is the master, that's A bus, and that's B bus. And if it's green, that's just telling me where it's going. And so all these are going to the A bus, which then I bring back in right here. And then I set the A bus to go to master. And so if I pot these all down, that's gonna pot them all down instead of having to go one by one. And the other thing that allows me to do is to do some controlling and say, oh, my ambient is just a little too loud. Let me just bring it down here.
And your ambient is a group of all your ambient mics are in that bus.
Well, I mean, this is just for soccer, it's just one, so it's just a single. It's just a single mic. But what you can do triggers to bring these all down at once, but it becomes complicated to figure out, like, if you've got it not at full volume, how to get it back to where it was. And so what this allows you to do is to set it wherever you want, and then you're just controlling the master culmination of on or off.
Right. So it's kind of like a submaster, in other words.
Yeah. It's a submix that then you're sending into the master. Yeah.
Sammy, you had a question?
Yeah. Well, I was going to share a little bit about how I do it, because I use vMix a little different way than Chris does. So I use audio buses in, and then I have one audio bus out for the room and one for the online stream. So I can separate and bring audio out to the room and then to the stream. And another thing, sometimes I do like events with translation. So then we do one bus with only translation that we send back to the stream. And then we turn down the main for the stream, and then just do like low audio for the stream, and then dub over the translator. So that's just other use cases for audio buses.
That's great. Chris, did you want to show anything else?
I think we can jump into questions. I've got a couple of things, but I think I'll use them.
We'll go ahead and jump into questions, get started, and then we'll come back to anything else there. So go ahead. Let's go to the jump for the first question.
John Foltz comes in from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. I've been using the Zoom integration in vMix for sports commentators. I like it better than vMix Call. I get good audio. They get video so they can see the show. And I can also send them comms over Zoom. It's a great workflow.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes. And I use it in a very similar way. And this is actually let's show this little, this one right here. So this is an example flowchart where I'm using Zoom to basically do it's kind of a little bit opposite of what John's talking about. Is it everything's on premises, so all my cameras, all my mixers, all my talent. But in this case, I'm not. And so I can send a multi-view into Zoom, and I can be somewhere else in the world, and I can see that multi-view, and I can talk back into that multi-view or into that Zoom meeting that then is a talkback channel to play-by-play. And so I'm sending into Zoom, I'm sending the left channel is basically program, and the right channel is the play-by-plays talkback, so that I can hear and I can communicate with them over comms. And to me, this has been like super, super, super helpful. And this is, I think, an example of an audio routing that's it's really not complicated. But yesterday when I was actually mapping that out, I was like, this is actually there's it goes a lot of different ways. The audio gets complicated fast. But yeah, I don't use the Zoom integration in vMix for what I think most people do, but I find it super valuable.
And better than the vMix call.
Yes, infinitely.
Yeah, a lot more stable.
Yes.
So go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, I also agree that it's more stable because the vMix call, it's like a peer-to-peer connection. So as long as you have good internet connections and you don't have any firewall issues, then it works well. But the Zoom is a lot more stable. So, but also before they released the Zoom integration, then we used vMix call for the same thing. Like we had an external translator that we brought it directly into our system, and then so it was an easy way, and it works pretty well as long as you have good internet connections.
Yeah, I think that the challenge with anybody who's been doing non-Zoom solutions and for these types of things is that Zoom is a multi-billion-dollar company that their entire business is based around stable video and audio communication, and as opposed to a side project for a very small company trying to figure out how to make this work. The level of stability is never going to add up to the same thing. Go ahead, Courtney.
So that just to get it straight in my mind, that Zoom communication is just internal communication. It's not going to the stream, in other words. And so in that case, do you ever send a stereo feed to the stream so that they have a stereo audio? And that Zoom communication is just to a mono feed for comms and a mono feed for program, so that the remote operators can see your multi-view and hear your comms.
Yeah, so for me, it is solely for comms. I do use stereo channels, but just they're not stereo. It's two mono channels. We don't do any. I mean, the final delivery is in stereo, but it's just summed mono. We don't have any, everything is a point source. So
you don't have stereo ambient mics or
there's no need
music
for any
that's stereo that you're feeding.
Yeah, and even if we do, even if there's some music that's stereo, it just gets summed to mono. It's just not necessary for what
not
we do.
Important on sports. Yeah, got it.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. I have a Dante input for my program audio. Can I assign this to only certain inputs so that when I run walk-in slides, I don't have to worry about muting Dante?
Good, Chris.
Yeah, and this is what I do for basketball. It comes in, you have the X32, then via Dante comes into vMix. And the way you would do this is probably with triggers on the inputs, and it kind of depends on which way you want to do it. Let's see. Let's show this one. Okay. So if I go to one of my main cameras, they're all black because there's no cameras on. If I go to one of my black, I go to triggers, and I say on transition in, set volume, input audio, 7 audio. That's my Dante input. I'm setting it to 100 over 500 milliseconds. So basically, when this camera comes on, when this camera goes to program, I'm going to pot up that audio input. And I have that same trigger on all of the cameras. And then on my commercials. So my ad, I'm going to go here, and one of these on transition in, set volume fade, audio. Now I'm setting it to 0. So when I go to a commercial, I'm going to pot that down. And so basically, there's a couple ways to do it. Like you could set anytime, like I could probably do it with just the commercial, just the commercial input, where I'm potting up when it comes in, or potting down when it comes in, and potting up when it goes out. But just kind of for some like double redundancy, I'm making sure that anytime I go to one of these cameras, it's always just going to make sure it's up. And so that's how you could do it. Just, depending on which inputs you wanted that audio on, you just set the trigger appropriately.
Next question.
Next one comes from Håkan Fors in Stockholm, Sweden. Any recommendations for a Dugan auto mix like the VST3 plugin for vMix?
Good, Chris.
I don't have any direct knowledge of this. I just did a little quick searching earlier this morning and found WT Auto Mixer. It's a video. It's probably about 4 years old now, but they show a video of them using their auto mixer in vMix. So that would be my first stop, is to kind of look and see if that does what you need.
Next question.
Zach Stallsmith comes back from Chautauqua, New York, and he says, with Zoom integration, what would that recommended audio source be to use? Isolated, mixed, or share?
Chris?
It depends on what you want to do. Share is a screen share. So if you're sending a screen share that has audio into it, that's what that source is going to be. So if you want the audio from a screen share, that's where you set that audio to. Isolated is that you have selected a person. It's like, I want this person. I'm getting this Zoom input. I'm going to get that audio. And then the mix is everyone. So it just depends on what audio you want.
Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand, up next. As an old-school certified Win32 API developer from the early 1990s, what challenges has Windows 11 presented you? Has Copilot and or Recall forced you to make changes over the Windows 10 version of vMix?
Go ahead, Chris.
This seems like more of a question for the vMix developers, which is not me. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Next question.
Harold Williams in Portsmouth, Virginia. Can I record a multi-track session in vMix like I can do in a DAW? If so, how can I name the audio tracks in the mixer?
Samuel?
Well, kind of. There's a couple of different ways you can do it, but if you're using MP4, then you can do a maximum of three different buses, which will equivalent to 6 different channels, and then it's in the 5.1 space, so you have to demux it later. You can also use vMix AVI, that's their own format, and then you can do up to 16 channels in total, including the master, plus all the buses. But then you have to demux it later, and it's not straightforward. It's like one file, and then you have to demux the different tracks. You can also turn on wave file recording, and then you can do all the separate buses separately. But that's also, there's no way to name it, so there's no direct multi-track. It's more like an afterthought.
Good, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, can you do it in vMix? Yes. Should you? Probably not. Like Samuel said a bunch of ways, the multi-quarter, like you can have up to 8, you can record up to 8 channels on an input, but it's just not, that's not what it's designed for.
Good, Courtney.
When it records WAV files, does it do mono PCM files, or does it do poly files, multi-channel? Or does it, if you've got 8 channels, does it make 8 individual files, or is it one file with 8 channels in it?
So in the multi-quarter, the way it works is that it will record, like you select which inputs you want, and then it will record a video, and it can record a separate WAV file. So if you had 4 cameras with 4 separate audio feeds, you would get 4 videos and 4 WAV files. Yeah.
Good, Samuel.
Yeah, and if you do the WAV file, the direct WAV file out, then you get like a stereo WAV file with 2 channels, of course. And you would at least want to, on one bus, you want to split the audio channels if you're doing multi-track recording on the only WAV files, if you're going to use the WAV file and not process it afterwards.
Good, Courtney.
Do you know if that WAV file is a broadcast WAV file that has a timecode timestamp and metadata that would perhaps be a place where you could put track names in the metadata for the individual tracks on that WAV file if it's a stereo file?
I don't believe so, no.
Someone does field recording, asking someone who does video whether it can do something that you would do in field recording. And the video folks are like, what does that mean?
What's metadata? I don't know what that metadata stuff is.
Exactly. Next question.
Let's see, Yeshua and Tia and Barbuda says, Chris, is there a reason you bring the bus back in as an input and then send it to the master rather than just sending the bus to the master as it is in vMix, i.e. enabling the master on bus A? Any advantages?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, there is this very specific reason I do that. So what he's talking about is in vMix, we've got our master bus, and then there's A, B, C, right? And so what I can do is take this bus A and just send it to master. And so now anything that goes through A is going on the master. But what vMix does not have is a way to programmatically fade a bus. So I can when I come in and out of a commercial, I can just turn it on and off, and it's just a hard on or off. By bringing it in as its own source, now there is a function that allows me to slowly fade it over time, and that's why. Yeah.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Could you use a plugin like Wave's playlist writer in the vMix audio pipeline? I could see it being useful for smoothing audio levels before transmission.
Good, Chris.
I believe so. It's not anything I've done. vMix supports VST plugins, so I have my Waves WLM meter I can attach to an input, and so if you should be able to, and I feel like I've heard that come up in conversations on forums and whatnot. So I think you can do that, but it's just not something I've particularly done.
Next question.
Next one comes from Siprat Singh in Bangalore. And how can I use vMix 4 NDI inputs with IFB talkback? Is it even possible?
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm not really sure what you're asking. You can bring all kinds of NDI into vMix. If you want to send NDI out of vMix, you can do that. You can also define what audio channels are on that output. So for example, I can go here, and if I go into settings and outputs, and vMix has 4 outputs, and so I can look at this. So this here, output 2 is a multi-view. I can click on config, and then I can define what bus is sent with that output. And so, for example, if you're asking, can you send an NDI output with a talkback channel on it? Sure, you absolutely can. Can you, if you have an NDI capture card where you're sending, that capture card's on it's on a camera, and so you're sending that camera video into the capture card, and then you're sending separate, maybe talkback audio into that capture card, you can absolutely then route that into a different bus and not go to master and then spit that back out. Yeah.
Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, also there's, I know some people have used the VST plugin that it has some audio routing in and out. I've played with it a little bit. I haven't been able to use it successfully. But there might be another way that you could send some NDI in and out. But it's not the preferred way. So I would do it the way Chris alluded to.
Good, Courtney.
Excuse my ignorance on NDI, but doesn't NDI have a bidirectional audio interface so that you can send audio return channel back from an NDI input on that one NDI input so that they can receive an audio return channel, which could be used for talkback? Or do you have to open up a separate NDI feed to go back to that person?
I'm not. That is new to me. So if that does exist, none of the hardware I have supports it, which would be great. Maybe I need to dig a little deeper into that.
Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. When using vMix for sports, what do folks prefer to do with the tagged replays after the event? Export them, delete, archive?
Go ahead, Chris.
What would I prefer to do is to export them and archive them. I don't always do that. With vMix Replay, and like any other replay system, it just chews up a lot of hard drive space, and so routinely you need to wipe that. Every 2 or 3 games, I need to wipe the drive to get rid of all the replay data. And so, if things are not like going crazy and we have like 4 million events, what I usually try to do is I will export. I don't care about the other team. I will export all of our replays, and then I will put those in a folder, and then that folder goes into the same folder where I store the save footage, the master file of the game.
Next question.
John Foltz, Selinsgrove. Chris, could you describe how you place mics for basketball?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So for basketball, usually we have 3 mics. One is taped to the floor, dead center, right under the table. And so, as they're coming up and down the floor, you get the squeaking and you get the basketball. Then I also have a mic that is like wedged into the padding underneath the backboard, basically as close to the net as I can get it, and kind of tape it all down, and that gives you that swoosh. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because it, like, when someone hits a great shot and you hear that, like, it's awesome. But when someone clanks one off the rim, it's like, and it's like really loud and annoying.
Next question.
Rian Smith in Trinidad, West Indies is up next with what's the lowest cost hardware you've used on vMix to do a 4-cam 1080p switching system with some graphics, and what's the total cost of something like that?
Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, well, the lowest cost input device I've used is the Elgato Capture Camlink Pro. It's got 4 inputs. And we used it with the i7, several year old i7. So I don't have the exact prices here, but I think at least in Norway, then the Elgato Camlink Pro costs about $350 equivalent.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so the problem with four cameras, you're at the limit of USB. I was able to get 3 USB inputs into a Nux Skull Canyon computer, many years ago when we first started, and it was very, very fragile. It's like they had to be turned on in a certain way and plugged into certain ports, and like if you did it and it worked, it's like, don't touch anything, don't jiggle any cords, it will be okay. But once you get more than that, as far as baseband inputs, you're going to want to go to something like a deck link and a Thunderbolt enclosure, or if you have an actual desktop. I mean, the cheapest way, we have one of the computers we have is a 12-year-old Optiplex that, like, 6 years ago I picked it up and put in a new power supply and a graphics card, and spent about $300 upgrading this thing. And it's like, it got me 4 cameras and a deck link Duo in there, and it worked great at 720p. When I moved up to 1080, it crapped out pretty quick. So this is a complicated question, because one of the things with software switchers, and this is on both ends, on the high end in terms of doing lots, in like, it doesn't always work. And so sometimes you need to figure out like what I can do, like where I'm at pushing that system. And you can ask a computer to do way more than it's capable of doing, and it will say okay, and then just won't do it. And it's not like a hardware switcher will just like, well, no, you can't do that because we
And
don't.
for
have
those of us who use a lot of hardware switchers, that's usually there was some experience somewhere with a software switcher that it just stopped working, dropped frames, crashed, did whatever because we asked it to do more than it could do. And then you're always like, well, I'm happy to be limited if I can have exactly what I'm told I'm going to have. So that's the challenge.
There is a ton of flexibility, which is great for me. But there's no hard limit. And so you've got to learn where that limit is with the system that you're running. And, it's the system you're running and what you're asking that system to do. And it's not just a simple checkbox. Like, well, I want to do this. Can we do that? Like, maybe.
Right. Go ahead, Courtney.
I've never run vMix on any of my systems. Does it require a GeForce RTX card as a video card, or can it run on a stock i7 or i9 processor?
So it can,
processor?
Just not very well.
No. So it utilizes the GPU. It utilizes the GPU acceleration, and if you're doing switching or compositing, it'll use GeForce.
It depends. So my first vMix rig was on an Intel NUC Skull Canyon computer, which was a pretty powerful little NUC computer, but its onboard graphics card was an Intel Iris, not very powerful. And I was able to do three USB inputs and an NDI input at 720p with replay and recording, and I was at 70% CPU utilization, and so I was living on the edge. So it can do it. It just kind of depends on what you're asking it to do. When you start,
I just wondered if the vMix software was optimized for a specific hardware GPU. Used the GPU for hardware.
It is optimized for the NVIDIA card. So an AMD card will do you no good at using vMix, but it is optimized for NVIDIA.
The RTX series, yeah.
Good.
Well, and even before the RTX,
Good, Samuel.
Yeah, and what I would do is if you're on a low budget and you have like a computer that's not so powerful, then I would get like a switcher, just like a 4-input 810 mini, and then just do the cutting on the 810 mini, and then bring it into vMix as one camera, and then you can then you have to do double switching then, but then you can do your overlays and everything on vMix, and then do the cutting on the 810 mini. So that's one workaround that I've also done when I'm using computers that aren't too powerful. And I wouldn't do any more than 2 inputs at the max if you don't have a GTX graphics card.
Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto follows up with following up on the mic placement question from earlier. What mics are you using?
Go ahead, Chris.
So, okay, you asked this question on Audio Day. I was not an audio person when I purchased these mics. I use Audio-Technica Pro 70s. When I first kind of got into this, I had found a video that suggested like these are an instrument mic, but they actually work. They're pretty good mic for having basically lab mics, and they were way more affordable than what people would call a good lab mic. And so I used them for that. Like I said, their instrument mics are not designed for that, but they were fine. They were at the time they were affordable. And I have them, so I've got 3 of those. That's what I use. I also use a handful of like Comica, I think they're called, from Amazon. There's just a cheap Omni condenser mic. They're like $40 a piece. That I use those in all our tennis outdoor cameras and in various other places. That if they're cheap, so if they get broke, I just buy another one.
Good, Courtney.
And on your backboard mics and some of the remote mics, are they all hardwired in, or are you using any wireless transmitters for the remote mics?
For basketball, everything's hardwired. Yep. You've got cables going all over it. Yeah.
Next question.
Yeshua in Antigua and Barbuda. Do you do any audio processing in vMix, compression, limiting, and so forth? You mentioned using WLM. Is all your processing done outside the box, and then you just monitor in the software?
Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, vMix actually does have some basic audio processing. So, for example, here's the audio compressor. Sometimes I just add like a low step of audio compression. So that's mostly what I use. They also have a basic EQ and stuff, but I normally only use the compressor in vMix.
Good, Chris.
Yeah, I don't do a ton. Every now and then I will use the compressor when I get a play-by-play announcer. I mean, it depends on how the audio is getting into vMix. If like for soccer, where I'm bringing in the play-by-play directly in as its own input, I can then put compression on that input when he gets a little too excited, and I can control that a little bit, so I'm not peaking. I will occasionally use a limiter on some if I'm using an input that's noisy, just to kind of so that it's silent when it should be. And then like I said, I have WLM on this computer here, but most of our production computers, I use Ulean because Waves is just way too complicated. And Ulean is just a simple install, and I can I can pull it up on any audio input and just kind of monitor where my levels are.
Next question.
Rian Smith, Trinidad, back. Can vMix deal with VR 180 or 360 video to live stream?
Go ahead, Chris.
No.
It'll be interesting to see how quickly this stuff starts to hit. So we're suddenly we're seeing about after Apple released their first movie last week. In that, I suddenly started getting a bunch of calls. Hey, what do you got? Where are you? What are you doing there? So we'll see how that looks. Next question.
Harold Williams in Portsmouth, Virginia. Can Tailscale be used instead of a Cloudflare tunnel to live stream from a hotel ballroom?
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't see why not. Actually, Tailscale is what I use instead of. I don't use Cloudflare. I found Tailscale like easier to get into. I looked at Cloudflare, and it just seemed really complicated to figure out what I actually needed, what I needed to install, how I needed to set it up. Tailscale was simple, and so I don't use it for streaming. What I use it for is like when we first started, I showed you how I use the Zoom plugin to be remote. Well, part of that is that I showed the audio chain, but the other part of that is I have Tailscale installed on a computer and Tailscale installed on my companion computer, and so those two are connected. And so then I can just plug in a Stream Deck, connect up companion satellite, connect my Tailscales, and all I need is a Zoom and a Tailscale, and I can do a broadcast remotely.
Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, what Chris said. I wouldn't necessarily do the live stream through the Tailscale VPN, because then you're just routing it to another internet connection. So there's more points of failure. So, but the control, of course, you would want to do through there. But I wouldn't do the video live stream through the Tailscale.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What hardware have you not had to buy because you have vMix? And what workflows can you only do because you have vMix?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so this is one of the main reasons why, for me, a software switcher is ideal. I just install vMix. I don't need to have a separate machine to do replay. I don't need a separate machine to do graphics. I don't need a separate machine to do switching. It's just one machine, and it does it all. And for me, I'm not like, I don't have a crew of like 14 people in the control room. I have one person, and when it's all in one, it makes it easier for one person to do all of those things. So like I said, when I first kind of got into this, I was using Wirecast and New Blue Titler, that was just kind of clunky. And the fact that vMix has all the titling stuff built in, and we'll talk about titling and graphics on vMix next Tuesday. Spoiler, tune in for that. It's just that it's all in one, and like for a one-man band type productions, it's super beneficial not to have, like, I've got multiple keyboards, but I don't have to have like multiple keyboards and be like, okay, here I'm directing here. Look, and I need to go over this computer to do a replay, and then over this computer to do a title change. It's all just built into vMix, and it just makes it so much simpler.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, we haven't talked very much about instant replay. Does it record continuously on the inputs, and then you can go back and replay anything? And does it do slow-mo replay?
Yes, it does. Let's find the right computer. Which one has basketball? So let's pull up. There we go. And where's my replay controller? So what it does is it constantly records, and so I can scroll through, and you can see up in here, the whole game. And what you can do is, like in most replay controllers, you can set an in and out, and that defines an event. And so for each one of these, my picks were actually good. So each one of these, you can see that it was in at 2010, or 2010, 27, and it was out at 2010, 31. The length, it was a 4-second replay. And then I've got some tags, and it defines which camera I'm going to use. And so I can play that at any speed I want. Let's see if I can make it a little bit smaller so you can see it in the.
You just have to select it by clicking on it and then hit the play button.
You just hit the play button, and then I can slow it down to 25. I can slow it way down to almost nothing.
It doesn't interpolate, though. It just slows the frame rate down. Right?
It just slows the frame rate down. Yeah. So yeah, and that's, to me, like there are other kind of software switchers that have like basic replay. Wirecast has it. Most of my colleagues use Production Truck that has it as well, but it's not a continuous recording. So like if you miss something, it's gone. Like for a lot of those.
While you're playing back, it's still recording, so it's still recording on that channel. While it's playing back.
And so then you can go back and you can be like, oh no, like, so the way I operate it as a one-man person is everything. I'm not doing ins and outs. I've got a button that says, and depending on the sport, it's like back 5 seconds or back 3 seconds, something like that. And it's like as soon as something is done, I hit that button. And does it have the best input location? Probably not. If you had an operator, they would fine-tune that to make it a more natural input. I don't have time for that. It's just me, and I'm also cutting. I'm also doing graphics, and so it's like it's close enough. And so it's
when you hit that button, it creates an event based on 3 seconds ago.
Yep. And
it stores that in the list.
Yep.
And how do you set the duration, or do you have to go back and set that later?
So what happens is So if I'm using a negative 5, for example, when I hit that button, it stops when the end point is when I hit the button, and the start point is 5 seconds before it.
So it sets as the end point when you hit the button.
Yep, when you hit the button.
That was good, and it must have occurred at least less than 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on a lot of my controllers will also have a -10. So like because I missed something, it's like I was late to it. Like, I'll go -10 just to make sure that I got it, and then I can, when I'm playing it out, I can cut
then you
out
can
early.
go back and trim it up later.
You can go back and I can
trim the endpoint.
Yep, I can click on like any one of these, and I can why are we still playing? Let's pause you. So I can click here, like, let's see, there's an input. I can just drag it like, let's go back a little bit, and you can see now my duration is 17 seconds. Or I can shorten it up. I can just click and drag. And if you have an actual controller, it's a little bit easier, but I'm not doing a ton of that. That's only for rare occasions when I'm actually going into the replays and manually tweaking. It's usually if I've made a mistake.
So they make a special controller that you can use for replay with a jog knob on it or anything?
They don't, but there are all kinds of controllers.
You
and
can use a
vMix
Scarhoy or something. Yeah.
You can use a Scarhoy. You can use an X keys. You can. There's a Contour Shuttle, I think, is a popular one. The vMix has their API is pretty extensive, and it can be MIDI, and there's all kinds of options for controllers.
Okay.
Did you want to show us anything else?
Yeah, I could show a couple other little tricks. One of the nice things about vMix is if you're using like a non-traditional type audio flow. So for example, maybe I have a camera in the field and I have a mic on top of that camera that's bringing in ambient audio that's set to channel 1. And then channel 2, I have maybe a stick mic that, just in case for a play-by-play interview. So I'm sending two completely different channels into that mic that's coming into vMix. One of the things I can do is I can go into that input and I can change my channel from all to separate mono. And what that does is instead of giving me a single slider, it gives me two individual sliders for each one of those channels separately in the interface, which makes it easy to be like, okay, this is my ambient mic, it's always on, and now we're going to talk into the stick mic. Let's turn that up or let's tune that, and then so I can control those separately in the interface, and that's kind of super handy. One of the things that it supports is multi-channel, and so under. Let's see. Actually, let's do this. I think it's just set up as single dual channel. So let's change my audio or do my input to 1. And then for audio input, by default, it's just stereo. But I could say embed all channels. And so now when I go into that audio interface.
We're not seeing your screen.
Oh, God. I'm sorry. Thanks. Sorry. Like I'm showing you things you're not even seeing. There we go. So that I brought it in all audio inputs, and so if I go to channel mixer, now I can see all 8 inputs on that SDI channel, and so like I can embed multiple things into the SDI, and actually this is one of the things that I do at our soccer venue, is that I have a single fiber channel that goes from our press box up into our building, and I have an audio embedder. And channel 1 is the ambient mic, and channel 2 is play-by-play, and channel 3 is the stadium announcer, and channel 4 is the music. And so those are all on separate SDI channels that then I can pull out and bring those into vMix separately and as their own inputs. And it's super handy in a lot of ways in terms of like routing and where you can move things in and out. And like I said at the top, I live in a world where things are really consistent, and I don't do a lot of changing from event to event. But if you were, I think it would be super handy to be able to change all the ways that you're routing and bringing audio in and bringing audio out. So.
Good, Courtney.
Just wanted to jump back to replay just for a second because I had one question that popped in my mind. Is when you hit the button that goes back 10 seconds, does it store that marker for all 4 cameras? And while you're doing play, let's say you got 4 cameras coming in, and while you're doing playback, can you switch between, say you said slow-mo playback, can you switch between the different cameras while you're doing playback? Or does it only playback one camera at a time?
Yeah, that's where it falls apart a little bit, and there's ways you can kind of deal with that. But by default, where did my replay go? There it is. By default, it does it is one replay event, like it's in and out, and then you can define which cameras are included. And so by default, what I'm doing in my workflow is I'm like capturing a replay event, setting which camera I want that replay event on, playing that camera. And so it's just one. And
But it's capturing all four, and you have the time in.
It's capturing all four. And if I selected multiple, so if let's just pick one, and this one. And if I go home, or I go the wide, the net, the overhead, the slash, and the end line. So I'll select all of them. And now, so now when I play that out, it's going to play, let's full speed. It's going to play angle 1, then angle 2, then angle 3, 4.
Oh, so it'll just do them sequentially from the start point then.
Yep. From this, It basically it will do from that same start point. It'll do angle 1, then it'll go back to that start point and play angle 2. Go back to that start point and play angle 3. And if you
does it handle that sweeper, doing the sweeper in and out too?
Yep.
It triggers that.
It triggers that. Yep. And you could define, and so I've got there's two different ones on an input and on in and out. I've got different sweepers. And if you had a setup where like you had a replay operator, there's ways where you can configure your shortcuts and you can configure interactions so that like okay, we have this event and I want to duplicate that event, and so then I could then transition from one to the other. There's more flexibility if you have a person doing it. But
can he have his own remote console in? Or how does that work? Or multiple people controlling the same one vMix instance?
So it's using the API. So whether it's a MIDI device plugged directly into the computer, or it goes through Companion or Central Control or something like that, it doesn't matter. It's just taking that input of what it wants to do. It would get complicated if you needed to do a lot of mouse actions.
So that remote, let's say your remote playback operator, does he have an image on his screen of the actual vMix control?
Yeah.
Software?
So I mean, there's handfuls of ways you can do it. You can have set a separate monitor and bring this replay controller and give them a view to this. There's also a full screen replay output. I got too many monitors on this screen. I can't show it. But yeah, like you could definitely put that full screen on a monitor and send that to whoever needed to see it. A lot of
have a separate mouse and keyboard, or then
you would have to decide who needs the mouse and keyboard more. Does it like, and you could do it ways where like if
I
the
want
TD,
the mouse. No, I want the mouse.
Yeah, like
you're struggling with it.
Yeah. You just in your workflow you would need to like define that and be like, okay, well, like the TD can do everything he needs to do with the Stream Deck or whatever console he has in front of him. So let's give the mouse to the replay person, and vice versa. Like, okay, well, maybe we've got everything that the replay person needs to do configured into his hardware controller. Yeah.
So it doesn't, unlike the the ATEM software that you can run on multiple, 4 or 5 of them on the same network, that interfaces to the ATEM hardware. It doesn't have a separate client software that could be run on another computer that communicates over the Ethernet to the main vMix machine.
No, but you don't necessarily need that, because you can build all your. If you're going to that trouble, you're going to want hardware anyways, and not software. You're going to want buttons.
You want a vMix operator has 4 arms. Yes.
Yeah, you want something tactile as opposed to like if you're really getting into like a replay operator who's doing lots of stuff, they're going to want tactile stuff and not mouse and keyboard.
Got it.
Thanks, Chris. It's really good to have you here.
It was fun.
It's good. We pulled Chris out. He's got so much knowledge. A lot of times he's in after hours, or he comes in on the weekends, and so great to have you during the week. So thanks so much for dropping in and sharing some knowledge with everybody. And thanks to the panelists, first hour and second hour. Can't do this without you. Thanks to the incredible team on the back end that makes this possible. All of these tools are put together by a great team who is carefully crafting all these things. There's management of what's going to be covered. There is the actual cutting of the show and building of the show and running of the show. There is the development that takes to manage the hardware and software, and we appreciate everybody's contribution. And thanks to the producers for all the questions. It's a really short show without you. And we've had short shows. So it's really, really great to have so many great questions. And remember that you can ask them every single day. In fact, starting anytime in the morning, go ahead and start throwing those questions in early. You can also use, of course, the QR code or just go to askofficehours.global and ask the questions there as well. Today, if we had done this in person and walked from person to person to person, the Tall Electroversal, we would have traveled 73,000 miles, 117,000 kilometers, and that is 576 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. That's good. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. I gotta run. I gotta jump into a meeting at 9. All right, thanks. See you, buddy.